A very good morning to all of you. My name is Matic Gajšek and I'm the Deputy Director of the Brussels-based Europe-Asia Center. On behalf of the Center, I'm very much thrilled to welcome you to our second webinar in the series of East Meets West. The objective of the webinar series is to present a range of high-level experts from a variety of disciplines, sharing their expertise and insights in order to really create and contribute to stronger dialogue and intercultural understanding of some of the societal's pressing issues. Following our very first high-level panel on the topic of EU strategic autonomy in the era of global internet governance, I'm today truly honored to welcome our guest, Excellency Mr. Ivan Bizjak, to join me for a discussion on the topic of human rights at the heart of the European integration and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. To just give a very short introduction to my guest today, Excellency Bizjak is one of the leading European experts in the era of human rights and has throughout his career held numerous prestigious posts, including the Minister of Interior and Minister of Justice post in the Republic of Slovenia and the National Ombudsman post. And afterwards continued his career in Brussels. He was the Director General for the General Directorate for Justice and Home Affairs at the Council of the European Union between 2005 and 2011. And without further ado, it is truly my honor to invite Excellency Bizjak to present us with his opening notes. Mr. Bizjak, the virtual floor is all yours.
Well, good morning. I'm very proud to be with you. I'm proud to have the opportunity to speak about such an interesting issue. Yes, human rights are at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals for at least two reasons. First, Sustainable Development Goals are about human rights, in fact. They address the most fundamental rights, basically equal human dignity, as stipulated in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, because hunger, extreme poverty, these are the problems that basically deprive people to exercise, to enjoy their equal human dignity. In fact, hunger, extreme poverty, this is an assault on human dignity. In the words of the Universal Declaration, this outrage the conscience of mankind, and eradication of hunger, extreme poverty, and everything linked to this is a precondition for people to enjoy their fundamental rights. And of course, the same is true when it comes to health and then education and similar issues. On the other hand, success of Sustainable Development Goals depends on a high level of protection of human rights. Respect for human rights is a precondition to achieve any success in this endeavor. Benefits of the development should be enjoyed by everyone. Ideally, I would say equally among all the people, realistically, at least fairly, with specific attention to those most vulnerable, those who should be addressed by the development. Inclusiveness is mentioned several times in the goals. And it can be achieved only in a society with high human rights standards. Here, it goes without saying, basically, good governance in every society is a precondition for every success in this direction. And it is also to stress that human rights can be efficiently protected only in a democratic state governed by the rule of law. So this means, when I said it goes in parallel, development and human rights, it is, on the other hand, also a crucial thing if we want to have some success with all these things, to develop a better human rights environment in all the countries concerned, all over the world, so to say. This is, to a certain extent, a kind of contradiction. You know, it is difficult to think that in a situation where there is a lot of hunger and things like that, and there is a lack of development, that the human rights would be developed or at a very high level. But this is a challenge in any case. In my view, one without the other will not give some reasonable results.
Okay, thank you so much for your message. I think it really gives me, I already wrote down quite a few points to kind of dig into. But maybe let's go for our audience. I mean, we're trying to be very informative and provide also some background. Where would you really position or identify the origin of the human rights movement in Europe, or let's say it in European Union dimension?
Well, the origins, this is a very fundamental word. I see, of course, that the issue of human rights is deeply rooted in our tradition, starting with Greco-Roman heritage, so to say, Jewish-Christian fundaments of Europe. It is to mention also French Revolution, for example, Enlightenment. In recent times, also the experience of totalitarianism in Europe, like Nazism, fascism, communism. On the other hand, it is interesting, and I would like to mention that it is about the relation between the rulers, authorities, kings or Caesars in ancient times, and the individuals. And in this regard, it is not to forget that already in 1215, Magna Carta Libertatum existed as a, so to say, first attempt somehow to, let's say, reconcile some tension between these two levels. On the other hand, I like always to mention, used to be an ombudsman, that already in 1809, the first ombudsman was created in Sweden. And that this concept slowly proliferated throughout the continent, not only in Scandinavia, but also in other parts, and wider throughout the world. And in 20th century, after the Second World War, there were some other new developments. Well, it is not to forget the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the Council of Europe, and all these things, and the idea of establishing the national human rights institutions. This is a bit more recent invention, so to say, but also very important and generally accepted. I mentioned Council of Europe. This was basically the group, not the institution, but the states joined there, and the idea was basically to improve the human rights situation and then divided Europe. divided by the Iron Curtain. Behind the Iron Curtain, the idea of fundamental rights was far from given. And this was the important role of the Council of Europe. I would mention in this regard also the social charter, beside the European Convention on Human Rights, European Court on Human Rights, that's extremely important. But also the social charter means that also the social rights were very much at heart of the Europeans. It is not to forget, speaking about human rights in Europe, human rights movements in Europe, the NGOs and civil society in general, because its role was indispensable during this development. I think a lot of achievements, a lot of progress was made through engagement of individuals in the NGOs, in the civil society, but of course also in the politics. I mentioned Iron Curtain. Behind the Iron Curtain, there were many dissident groups that slowly, but somehow surely, changed the nature of the society in their countries. It is not to forget them when we speak about progress in this field. And about my country, Slovenia, I can firmly say that human rights, together with freedom, democracy, rule of law, were the main motive and engine when we strive for independence. And this is not to be forgotten nowadays. The focus on human rights disappears to a certain extent, where when we feel that there is no particular problem. I like to say that human rights, this is a never accomplished mission.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just with the last few points you've made, both with the NGOs, the civil society, and now in the example of the Slovenia, what would you say are really the unique features of the human rights approach in Europe? If we focus a bit more on European context and your vast experience also with the Council of Europe working on this topic and as an ombudsman.
Well, I mentioned, but only briefly, the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court on Human Rights. This is, I think, a very good invention. And it happened years and years ago. European Convention together with Court, this means the judicial protection at a high international level. Also in particular in individual cases. So after you exhaust all the domestic remedies, you can go to Strasbourg. And this is, I think, a very important thing, not only for the individual concern. It is important for the status of all of the people in Europe. And not to forget, Council of Europe has 47 member states. It's broader than the core Europe, or much broader than the European Union. So the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights is widely used also in domestic cases. The judges refer to some decisions of the European Court on Human Rights also in domestic cases. And this is, I think, a very important issue, very important thing we have here in Europe. On the other hand, its characteristic for Europe, that there is quite a high accent on social, economic, and cultural rights. You know very well that there are some documents on this also at the UN level, but in my view, it is there is much less attention to this type of rights in some other parts of the world. So this is, I think, a unique feature of the European approach toward human rights. So here it is to mention also the European Social Charter, a kind of, as some people say, social constitution of Europe. Even though it is to a certain extent optional, but it gives a very clear orientation as far as social rights of all individuals in the area of Council of Europe are concerned.
Mm-hmm. And actually here you just kind of lead me a little bit to the next question that I have. You slightly connotated it in one of the previous questions as well. Are there also challenges when reinforcing the, let's say, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights in Europe? There is one of the documents that has been issued by the Council on Human Rights-based post-COVID recovery in a couple of months ago, where there is even a quote from the European Commissioner, President of European Commission, Mr. Ursula von der Leyen, who says nobody will be left behind and no human rights will be ignored. So is there also challenges in this reinforcement in the context of European Union?
Yeah, so it is to be quite clear. We jumped from what I mentioned, social charter, to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. So to a smaller area, but to another very strong document, part of the EU primary law, what's not to be forgotten. And this is, of course, also a very strong signal, European signal, how important the human rights are. So the Charter of Fundamental Rights, first adopted only as a specific document, became a part of the primary law, a part of the treaties at the same level. So it is the orientation for the court. But on the other hand, it is to admit that the Charter is limited by the competencies of the Union as defined in the treaties. So it is not something that would be about everything as the European Convention is. This is about the rights when it comes to the context between the individuals and the European Union institutions. On the other hand, it is true, and this is important, that European Convention on Human Rights is binding for all the EU member states, and this is not to be forgotten. It is also not only the idea, but the process for the EU to access to the European Convention of Human Rights. Here there are some, of course, problems. It lasts for, after the Lisbon Treaty enforcement in 2009, we are now 2021, and it is still, this process is still not finished. At the beginning, there was, yes, first, it is to say, EU is a very specific entity. It's not like other Council of Europe member states. It is composed of 27 Council of Europe member states. Another problem, there was the supremacy of the courts, Court of Human Rights or Court of Justice of the EU, which is the Supreme Court then. There are some other open issues, but in any case, this is, I think, only a very strong signal that the fundamental rights in terms of EU, so human rights are very much at heart also of the European Union. This is demonstrated also by the specific pieces of legislation adopted in the EU. I would mention only GDPR, data protection regulation, or in my favorite area, freedom, security, and justice, there are, for example, minimum rules on the rights of individuals in criminal procedure. These are quite some achievement. These are binding documents for all the EU member states. Of course, in the areas where the EU has no competencies or limited competencies, shared competencies, there, of course, it is impossible to prescribe on the Brussels level, so to say, on the EU level, some guarantees for individual rights. But in any case, the direction is very clear.
Mm-hmm. Very insightful. And if I dig a little bit more into and make it the transition of, let's say, the challenges, challenges of human rights protection in, let's say, specifically in Europe context, and if we compare it, the pre and post COVID-19 dimension, compared maybe to some other territories, we know that EU and Asia have performed relatively well when it comes, when it came to combating the COVID-19, in comparison to, let's say, territories in like, let's say, India, Brazil, or, to some extent, at a certain stage also US. Is there also some lessons that we have learned through this pandemic, specifically looking at the human rights, actually?
Well, first of all, it is to say that health is not an exclusive competence of the European Union, and it became quite clear at the beginning of this pandemic. So, as usually, also in this case, we hear the calls for the health union as for the financial union and things like that when the crisis occurs. Secondly, also there are very strong differences among the EU member states, how they cope with the COVID situation in terms of restrictions, in terms of rights of individuals. It is, of course, it is to say that the rights of individuals in the fundamental human rights were significantly restricted during this COVID situation. And speaking about post-COVID period and about human rights, it is indeed the most important thing to abolish all the COVID-related restrictions of human rights as soon as possible and in full. It is not enough just, to try to, let's say, formally say, okay, everything is as it was before, but it is to analyze very thoroughly what or how the habits of people has been changed as a result of government interventions. And it is also to eliminate the negative consequences of these restrictive measures, speaking only about children. So they were deprived of going to the school. They were not in company of their friends. So this will have some consequences. And it is to be very attentive to, let's say, eliminate these negative consequences. And indeed, also in practice, not only as far as the regulations are concerned, it is to be very attentive to, let's say, really eliminate, abolish anything what could remain as a negative result of this situation that was very critical, of course.
Yeah, I definitely, I think this message really resonates with a lot of people, given that, you know, the stress, the pandemic period really imposed on, I mean, on the broader societies. I mean, from, let's just say, from example of children to adults in that respect. To kind of maybe zoom out a little bit as well, looking more on the, let's say, EU transatlantic relationships, are there also differences in realities in human rights approach, let's say, between European perspective and the let's say the American perspective, US perspective?
Okay, so this was a bit more specific, US perspective.
Well, we can do it. We can say American.
No,
let's say
okay, a bit broader to say. First of all, there are some things we have in common. I mentioned already the national human rights institutions. Paris principles are international minimum for such institutions. This is a document UN endorsed, means universal. And such institutions are everywhere in the world, not in every country, of course, but are quite known. And this is the idea, something we have in common to some extent. Also, ombudsman institutions. There are many such institutions in, at least in Central, South America, on the provincial level in Canada, for example, so less in the US, of course. And it is what we have in common. But, well, speaking about differences, there are some differences in the concept. Let's say, I mentioned personal data protection. The concept of privacy in the States is a bit different of the European concept of individual data, personal data protection. So this even represents some problems in exchange of data between the Union and the United States. On the other hand, it is to state, or at least it is my impression, that there is much less attention to economic, social, and cultural aspects of human rights in the States. Even if you take the State Department reports on human rights in different parts of the world, they will not speak that much about such types of rights. And well, here I would stress that they do not have any Court of Human Rights as we have in Europe for all the 47 member states of the Council of Europe. So I think this is some important thing we have, the US do not have, not to be too proud of this, but I think for every individual in Europe to know he or she can finally go to Strasbourg is still something I think generally felt as very important possibility.
The reason why I will explain myself now, actually, the reason why I kind of angled the question a little bit more towards the US as well was because just in recent days, there's been, I would say, a rather big development on the international geopolitical kind of horizon, with the United States returning to the UN Human Rights Council. This was happening just the past Thursday on October 14th. And it's basically 3.5 years after this dramatic walkout that the former President Donald Trump has staged at that point, accusing the Council of Hypocrisy in obsession with haranguing the Israel. So do you think the situation of human rights in US, particularly looking at the, let's say, the movement of Black Lives Matter, I Can't Breathe movement, is that becoming also a challenge, or a challenge? Will there be the rejoining of the US? Will that be a positive development also in the global perspective, with them rejoining the Human Rights Council?
Well, it is, for me, the most important thing is the constant attention to the issue of human rights. This can become sometimes something a bit forgotten if everything goes well, and this is why I find it very important also the issues you mentioned, like Black Lives Matter and even Me Too or things like that. This, at the end, put human rights in limelight, so to say. So draw our attention worldwide to some issues that can be neglected, that can be forgotten otherwise. So every step in this regard, to speak about problems we have, or individual countries have in the field of human rights, also the formal membership, let's say, in this Council for Human Rights, all these things give an appropriate weight, so to say, an appropriate attention to the issue of human rights. It is, as I said, human rights are never accomplished endeavor. It is mission never accomplished. And on the other hand, if you are too sure that everything is okay in your country as far as human rights are concerned, then it will happen something that will remind you that things are not forever. It is to be attentive on a daily basis, so to say, in order not to forget something, in order not to allow some developments that would be detrimental for the human rights status in a particular community, society, state, or something.
Mm-hmm. I mean, very insightful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, really, for all this input. To kind of round up our short conversation, I would actually like to quote. I've just in this week, based on this development, one of the messages that I really resonated for me was the commentary on the U.S. return to the Council by the executive director of the Human Rights Group in Geneva, Mr. Mark Limon, who said that multi-rail systems should not be held hostage by these big political geopolitical power games, and I feel that this was such a message that resonated really towards that. I mean, human rights is, as you say, it's really about human. It's so synonymous with human dignity, and it's so closely connected with good governance. In your opening speech, so let's really hope that this relationship between the civil society, NGOs will really remain so strong despite the kind of the global potential global games that might outplay also in this area. So if you might have some sort of a closing remark from your side as well.
No, I think I said everything. So my basic message is human rights are very important, very serious thing, and it is never to be completely satisfied with the human rights situation in any environment. So even if it's quite well, it could be better. And even if we are satisfied, it could happen something we do not like. And it's to be attentive on a daily basis and throughout the world. So this would be perhaps my conclusion in terms of everything we have spoken so far.
Perfect. With that note, Excellency Bizjak, I would really like to thank you for taking your time to speak with us and share this very important message. So thank you so much. And for all the viewers, we are very much looking forward to welcome you to our next episodes. We'll be addressing some of the other pressing societal issues and trying to dive deeper and develop a deeper understanding to the topics. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.